I think our best friend and anyone's best friend in terms of handling an AI project, whether it's an in-house solution or supplied by a third party, is privacy by design. For example, AI applications that are used in the wider process for granting credit, they are rather a background tool in the process. They don't really affect a person's access to essential services. I would say when procuring a solution from a third party, just make sure you carry out appropriate due diligence prior to entering into any agreement. There is a real risk that resources may be shifted from investment to compliance.
Hello everyone, I am Sergio Maldonado and this is Masters of Privacy, a set of interviews covering the intersection of marketing, data, privacy and technology with a clear goal in mind, which is redefining the relationship between people, brands and media around transparency and control. Which is to say, we're aiming for real customer centricity, or if you will, human centricity. We regularly talk to DPOs, CMOs, CDOs, and whoever else we find interesting and able to share valuable insights. So we hope you like it. Please do reach out if you have any ideas on future topics or speakers. We have Sandy Tsakiridi here today. She's a Senior Legal Counsel at HSBC's Global Data Privacy team and a dual qualified lawyer, both in England and Wales and in Greece. Sandy has also been an external legal counsel in London and Brussels, and is an advisory board member at the IAPP, so the International Association of Privacy Professionals. With Sandy, we'll talk about the upcoming EU AI Act, or Artificial Intelligence Act, its impact on the financial services sector, as well as the challenges of implementing an AI governance program. Now, this is very important as we are moving from mere guidelines on trustworthy AI or ethical AI standards to a full-scale legal framework. Sandy, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. So, look, just to jump straight into it, AI. There's an AI Act coming up in the EU, and you're in financial services, of course. So, is there anything in the context of this AI Act that you believe is really important for you, for financial services, or anything that you think is missing by the looks of what we have today on the table?
Right. So I think from the outset, we have to acknowledge that the proposed AI Act is an ambitious framework, as on the one hand, it's the first of its kind at global level with a very broad extraterritorial scope of application, and also the potential to become the golden standard at global level.
And how they love it in Brussels.
Oh, yes.
To be saying a global standard, I want to be first. It's like this is a contest, and this is like the little reward. Oh, we're first.
It's true. And we saw that with the GDPR, right? It eventually did become the golden standard.
Yes.
So, yeah, on the one hand, we have this. And then on the other hand, we have the attempt of the European Commission to sort of reconcile the protection of individuals, legal security, and innovation. So the task of the European Commission is not an easy one. And in that respect, I think that the draft AI Act provides a useful starting point for an important discussion that needs to happen between policymakers and the industry on the appropriate standards that should be applied to the development and use of AI. So I've heard a lot of discussions around, should we have regulations in the first place? And my view is that the crucial question is not the if, as in whether the use of AI technology should be regulated, but rather the how, meaning whether this is done in an appropriate way so that innovation is not hindered, but also while having safeguards in place to promote trustworthy human-centric AI. Yes. And I think that's a delicate balance to strike, right? I do believe that having well-crafted regulation in place can be an enabler of long-term innovation. And I also believe that transparency around requirements strengthens the trust of users and provides designers of AI applications with clarity on what's expected from them. And we've seen that with the GDPR. Having a single harmonized framework in place does help to minimize the risk of having like a fragmented regulatory landscape with different national legislative requirements across the EU member states.
Very good.
When it comes to financial services, I would say that the intention of the EU to provide such clarity has been welcomed, but there have been concerns around certain elements of the approach taken. Around the positive elements include requirements for increased transparency. For example, having an EU database for standalone high-risk AI applications that will be publicly accessible. Also, measures in support of innovation. For instance, the regulatory sandboxes to facilitate the development and testing of AI systems under strict regulatory oversight, of course, before they are placed on the market, and also granting SMEs priority access to such sandboxes.
Yes.
Now, having said that, the AI Act has been criticized for potentially having a chilling effect on innovation in Europe, for example, by deterring investment into European startups and driving developers to more business-friendly countries, shall we say, that where they can, innovate more freely with less bureaucracy. So I think, given the fact that organizations will need to make significant investments to achieve and monitor compliance with the AI Act, there is a real risk that resources may be shifted from investment to compliance and actually make the EU a less competitive economy in the AI field. Another point that I see as a positive development, which has been challenged a lot actually, is the risk-based approach adopted by the European Commission, because it does acknowledge that not all AI systems should be subject to additional regulation, and it's actually more targeted than the line of action proposed in the Commission's 2020 white paper on AI, given that the level of compliance requirements matches the risk level of a specific use case. Mm-hmm. Having said that, the financial services industry has expressed concerns as to whether horizontal regulation could lead to the duplication of existing requirements or even to conflicting requirements, because the environment that financial services or organizations operate in is already highly regulated. So I think in that respect, additional guidance will be needed either from the European Commission or sectoral authorities like the European Banking Authority to address any areas where there may be such overlapping or potentially conflicting requirements.
Yeah, very good. So, Sandy, just to drill down a little bit. So the sandbox, that was very interesting to me. And you are used to it in the financial services industry, yes. Right? The sandbox is a concept that existed for fintech and exploration and joint innovation. And so if there is a sandbox, I really think it is a good idea, because then there is a place where you can, test the waters in terms of will these be high risk? If it is, which are the steps involved? And before I go to market, then I can explore things with other players. At the same time, as you are in the sandbox, you're exposing everything that you do as an innovator. So all of your IP tied to developing machine learning or applications is also going to be shared in a pool. Do you think that's positive? Because I saw in fintech, in some cases, it was very positive, everyone innovating together when it came to PSD2 applications and so on. But at the same time, everyone did the same thing. Or perhaps that's my impression. Do you think it could be counterproductive in terms of IP and people being able to fly solo? How do you see that?
Potentially. I mean, if we're talking about small organizations that don't necessarily have, a lot of resources, it can work to their benefit because, essentially they are joining forces, sharing knowledge to an extent, of course. You're not going to, put all your cards on the table, but still it can be helpful. But then equally, I mean, especially for bigger organizations who are able to make these big investments and already have the resources and probably, the know-how from other operations in the past, I can't see why they would be reluctant, to actually share freely all that body of knowledge.
Yeah, no, just curious. There's always that thing with intellectual property that drives me crazy with machine learning, because in the end, there's all this work that you put in together, and it's not just about the training data and validation data and whatever. It's also about, the skill into developing the algorithms.
It takes a lot of work, and actually sometimes, with these technologies is who gets, to finish the race first, in the sense that, whoever places like a product or a service in the market that it's innovative enough, even if it's not fully ready, is actually the winner of the race. So
it's actual data, exactly, and then it starts getting better, faster. Sort of TikTok style in another world.
True. I think it will be also interesting maybe to talk about the high-risk AI applications, particularly around credit worthiness, and also some of the requirements around training and testing data.
Yes, please.
In the
please,
AI Act. So speaking about the risk classification of AI use cases, as you may know, and I'm sure many of the listeners will be aware, currently the list of high-risk AI systems, which is subject to specific regulatory requirements before and after launching into the market, includes those used to establish the credit score or evaluate credit worthiness of individuals. In practice, however, things are a little bit different because not all possible applications of AI in this space can introduce the same level of risk. For example, AI applications that are used in the wider process for granting credit or providing essential services, such as acquisition targeting for marketing, collections modeling, they are rather a background tool in the process. They don't really affect a person's access to essential services, and in any event, they are already regulated by financial supervision authorities. So I think a more proportional approach is needed to capture different nuances of potential risk. Also, I find that the requirement that training, validation, and testing data sets are sufficiently relevant, representative, free from errors, and complete is not very much aligned with commercial reality. And that's because a large volume of AI applications run on observational data, so data collected as part of day-to-day operations of a company, for example, data regarding the usage of a certain product, and not on statistically constructed sample data. So in my view, a good way forward would be to implement controls for certain data properties. That could be rules or metrics with allowed thresholds for data to be deemed as good enough. And lastly, the definition of AI, it has caused a bit of a stir. I mean, I personally find it encouraging that the definition in the current draft is not static, in the sense that it can be reviewed by the European Commission as technology evolves, but it is currently too broad, as it can capture techniques that are not traditionally considered as AI. So I think a more targeted approach is needed to distinguish between different methods and the scope of applicability. I don't know what your view is on that.
Yes, I was thinking in terms of risk and credit worthiness and so on. So transparency here is sort of a double-edged sword, right? Because if everything is explainable, and I understand there's the risk of bias in all these data sets, training, validation. And so these days, there's much talk about synthetic data and how sort of adding synthetic data that could then balance those data sets. Because of course, everything is biased, right? The algorithm is born with whatever you know, because from the start we're humans, and as humans, whatever we know is already a bias with regards to what we do not know, we haven't experienced, and it doesn't mean bad faith, right, or anything of the like. As you then start training a model, whichever data sets are available to you are going to bring some bias into it. So there's going to be the algorithm that bears, it contains whatever it inherits from its creators. And it's going to have the data sets that you bring in. And then once it hits the market itself is going to shape the model as it learns based on whatever it ingests. So you could be, so I was thinking, there's always this idea about, how explainability in the machine learning models helps us, get rid of biases. So explainability, at least let us understand how they were shaped. But when you get into financial services, of course, much of the value of financial services is actually built on the fact that we could not really predict fully what was going to happen when it comes to credit worthiness or to someone not paying a loan or whatever, meaning that the risk that you take, for example, in insurance, right? Let's think of insurance. I'm thinking insurance has so far been about who is better at estimating, who is going to have an accident, for example, in car insurance versus who's not, and then balancing the risks, charging, a fee. If everything becomes really predictable and who is less likely with great accuracy to have an accident, we've been saying that for a long time, right? That you're going to have certain people who will be kicked out of the system, because the better the system becomes, the less you want people that everybody knows are more likely to have an accident. So eventually, models that are actually based on the fact that we do not know, on uncertainty, and on the fact that there is a black box, would disappear with transparency, and it would take us into a world where, everything is replaced by great unfairness. But perhaps this is going crazy or going too far. What's your feeling, between explainability, biases, and financial services that have for a long time been based on the fact that we could not really predict what was going to happen?
Yeah, I think all what you mentioned has to do with, trade-offs and risk appetite, and the fact that organizations will, at the end of the day, have to make decisions, judgment calls really around, different requirements and how they can balance those with at least to a satisfactory degree. So when we're talking about transparency and the black box problem, then we also have to consider how much transparency, in the sense that you don't want to, as an organization, make yourself vulnerable in terms of security, or expose your IP, going back to the point we were making before. Or with regard to bias, yes, to which extent, you are replicating historic bias in the data that you're using, because, for the most part, especially when it comes to machine learning applications, you are going to use, for the most part, typically at least, historical data that have inherent, perhaps, biases that were present at the time that the data was created. Also, with regard to, how much data you need to use to, sufficiently train your algorithms. And this has to do with whether you are actually using synthetic data or, real data. And also because, typically you need large volumes of data to be able to, to train your AI solution to a satisfactory, accurate degree. But then you also have the data minimization principle. So, use as little data as possible. So it's a delicate balance to strike. And I think it has to do with, overall decisions that organizations are making in terms of, their risk appetite, but also it's an ad hoc question, right? Depending on each AI application. So more or less, like every time you have to weigh these kind of requirements and decide, what the best outcome on an ad hoc basis is.
Yeah, very good. So last question about this approach, the EU framework, the interplay between the AI Act and Article 22 GDPR. Do they fit well together, in your opinion?
I think because the GDPR is technology agnostic, and we know that AI does involve, to some extent at least, fully automated decisions. As long as we have the right safeguards in place, well, again, query to what extent there is enough of transparency and explainability to be able to carry out a satisfactory human review. But
Yes.
To the extent that these, safeguards are put in place and are offered to the data subject at hand, like every time, I think it's, again, the best possible outcome. It's not about, what we could do in a perfect world. I think we have to adjust all those, solutions to the real world, because this technology does provide a lot of benefits. So we have to find, the silver lining.
Yeah, you were talking about innovation and how whether this would hurt, the EU or the UK, and by the way, what's happening with the UK? Is the UK, because the whole thing started before Brexit, the whole initiative, or at least the whole idea. How does this work?
So the UK now have their own AI agenda. The ICO recently actually published a list of their priorities, and actually bias and fairness, what we were talking about, is high up there. So I think the UK is currently one of the leaders in the AI race, together with certain, EU member states like Germany, for example. But they will certainly want to, capitalize on Brexit and showcase, what it can do.
Less bureaucracy.
Yes, exactly. Make it more business friendly, more agile. And I think this is also evident, from the Data Act. What they are proposing as a renewed framework. So this is, I think, the overall aim, to make it more friendly for investments, innovation, around anything business related.
It makes all the sense that things like DALL-E, for example, right, from OpenAI in the US, come out more easily and faster in the US, simply because you can just go for it.
Or even in China, where it can be even cheaper as well. So, I mean, the framework is a bit obscure, so less transparency or legal certainty overall. But
and with time, you could always adjust it, and then it will have grown to such extent that there will be no way to compete with locally grown models, and we're back to the same story, the same European story.
But then if it's a product you're placing on the market, you have to consider that, individuals, like consumers, are becoming more and more sophisticated.
Right.
So I'm not sure to which extent someone would trust, a system if they knew that, it was constructed, like trained and tested in a country like China, for example, where there is not the same framework as in Europe. So then it's also like the power that we have as consumers as well, right?
You're right. What about you? I mean, what challenges have you found implementing your own AI governance program? If there's anything you could talk about with regards to that.
Yes. So at HSBC, we're currently on the way to develop our AI strategy as part of the bank's wider technology strategy. And the first step to that direction has been the development of a set of principles on ethical AI governance that will inform our AI strategy. My personal view is that this was the right starting point, as AI can only reach its full potential within a framework that supports trust, like we were talking about, and operates in a way that benefits each stakeholder. So I'm glad to see global organizations like HSBC leading the discussion on what kind of AI we want going forward. So in terms of the principles, when they were created a few years ago, the bank took stock of some of the external events at the time, such as the Cambridge Analytica case, developments in Hong Kong and the EU, which highlighted that thinking responsibly about how to use data and technology would become even more important in the future. So essentially, these principles are about conducting business not only in an individually profitable manner, but also following a holistic approach, which serves both HSBC as a business, but also our customers. The key pillars of these principles have to do with acting in line with HSBC's values, protecting privacy, starting with a clearly defined purpose, addressing issues relating to unfair bias, being responsible for AI, adapting governance processes to meet emerging needs, and contributing to the development of best practices.
So, Sandy, sorry, so just to stop there for a second. So we think, because when I think of governance, I think, for example, what's been happening with GDPR, right? Well, within a bank, a large bank, and I've been pretty familiar with another very large bank, it gets to the point where there's so many little products and mobile apps. Every country has one, and then there's all these agile teams where you've got designers and of course the product manager and then developers. And then with time, there's going to be either a DPO or someone from the DPO's team within the product team. And so they've been, when it comes to the GDPR, looking at their privacy impact assessment.
Yeah.
There's going to be all of these little pieces that have been taking place over the past few years. Do you see that as part of the governance program within the bank, there'll be something like that, like an emissary of your own AI policy team or compliance team within product teams, so that you can ensure there's no bias? And do you see we'll get to that extent? How do you see can easily, in very practical terms, apply through training? In practical terms, do you see some specific levers?
Well, in general, because HSBC has been operating for years in one of the most heavily regulated industries, it's quite mature in terms of risk management and internal governance processes. So this has facilitated the creation of an AI roadmap. At the moment, this roadmap is at global level. So I think first you create like the overall program, and then once you are mature enough, it's time to progress within, specific sub teams within product teams that are specialized, people or even teams, to deal with AI in particular. So at this point, the program which is underway includes, first of all, mapping strategic AI use cases within the organization, assessing the risk, setting out specific goals when it comes to legal, ethical, change management, technological aspects, training as well. So from the beginning, when we were designing the program, it was very clear that a horizontal risk management approach was required, at least in the beginning, to bring together stakeholders from different areas within the organization. So what has worked for us so far is to create a cross-functional business team to ensure that the creation of the AI framework is designed in a holistic way, and that it can be actively managed and adapted on a medium and long-term basis.
So, so if anyone in the bank, right, as a large enterprise, now just sort of bring it down to even more in more practical terms, someone comes with a new app or a new project that integrates machine learning models, or that you develop, because again, you, as you say, you propagate your capabilities so that everybody within the organization sees, there's a repository, internal sandboxes, whatever you come up with. And then what are the first steps that you would follow to manage risk across the supply chain? Because at some point there could be models provided by third parties like Google Cloud, TensorFlow, AI as a service providers, whatever, Lex and Poly in the Amazon world. Which steps will you take in that sort of supply chain?
I think our best friend and anyone's best friend in terms of handling an AI project, whether it's an in-house solution or supplied by a third party, is privacy by design. So just making sure that, data protection aspects are considered from the beginning and during all stages of the life cycle of the project, because as we know, retrofitting compliance is far more difficult and expensive. So I think besides that point, what's crucial in my experience is to understand what type of AI technology is involved and how the AI solution works in practice. So basically to see what is the problem you're trying to solve, what is the added value you're trying to bring in the business with this AI technology, and understand what the technology can do for you. Because this is probably the best way that you can, properly identify and assess the data privacy risk. And this can be quite tricky when it comes to, deep learning methods or very complex machine learning models. Again, I think it's very important to have cross-functional, well-resourced teams with open communication channels, because it's true that sometimes us lawyers don't speak the same language as, stakeholders from other disciplines like data scientists, security experts, IT staff. So I think it helps. It's always helpful, to overcome this barrier and bring people together to work as a team. Also, when it comes to the DPAA, I think it's helpful to distinguish between use cases at the training stage, whether that involves, the development or the enhancement of the system, and then the deployment stage, and adjust the risk assessment accordingly. And then also, when it comes to, whether it's, again, an in-house solution, and especially when it's a solution procured from a third party, you need to kind of be extra careful on some points. I would say when procuring a solution from a third party, just make sure you carry out, appropriate due diligence prior to entering into any agreement. But then whether in the context of a DPIA for an in-house solution, or when, scouting for a possible third-party vendor that you will, source the solution from, just be very clear about issues like the relationship between the parties in terms of, who is the data controller. Especially given that AI applications will likely need to be, continuously updated while in use.
It's not a closed system, exactly. So how can someone, sit back and say, I'm a processor, and here's the tool, right? And then it's you who decides the purpose, when in the end, you're feeding back into the system.
Exactly.
You're helping me get better. And I have got a purpose, which is independent from yours, and we could be joint controllers, I guess, if we're going in the same direction to a certain extent, or we could be independent controllers in a chain.
And it's tricky, but it's also crucial, because, this also comes with a question of liability and accountability. So who is responsible for what? So well, a DPIA is also a living document. So, it can be and should be adjusted as the system evolves. But yeah, this is one definitely to keep an eye on. It's not static. So it's not something that you determine and you just, leave on a shelf and just, leave it at that.
Yeah. Sorry, Sandy, just to ask you one last thing, if that's okay.
Yes, sure.
Connected with this and with the first question, bring it all together. Do you have much hope on this? I understand there's going to be this European AI board, right? It's like an IAPP for this. And then there's going to be all of these national offices, sort of like DPAs or like supervisory authorities for this one thing. What is the value of this? So what value do you expect from a European, AI board, from 27 or 28, if the UK is part of that, authority supervising AI? Do we really need so many agencies? Do you see value coming out of them? Does it make sense perhaps to have a single one, so we don't have the disparities we have, when it comes to the GDPR? Or why do you think there is such need for country-specific? Do you see value in there? Have you thought about it? Perhaps not.
No, I have actually. I think I would like to be hopeful, but I'm a bit doubtful as to, how efficient this kind of decentralized system could be. First of all, I mean, if it's because there has been talk as to, whether this national boards, let's say councils, whatever they're going to be called, are going to be formed by teams from the national regulators. And even if not, I mean, we've seen that with the GDPR. Typically, these agencies, councils, teams, however they should be called, could be understaffed. Also, I'm doubtful as to the extent to which the knowledge and expertise is there in all EU member states. Equally, there have been concerns around the role of the European Commission and how central it should be, and how autonomy this body should have. So again, I'm not sure that there is like an ideal solution. I think there should be some kind of cooperation between member states at national level, because they do have different agendas. They should be heard at national level, but I'm not sure whether a separate body would serve that purpose. It could be a committee, as part of a central body, for example.
Yeah, that'd be good, because you may have different agendas. Yes, maybe Italy, wants to be very strong in predicting certain things for the fashion or the car industry, and Germany for, metal industry or whatever. And how are they going to be applying the very same exact guidelines across the board for what's high risk, what's not? I worry about disparities. But anyway, that was just, thought in the wind. All right, well, Sandy, listen, thank you very much. Great insights. Thank you. Let's see how this thing develops. Thank you.
Yes, it will be interesting for sure.
Yes. Well, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the discussion, and hopefully, we'll have another session to talk about, the update of the AI Act when it's in place soon.
I do hope so. Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Thank you, Sergio. Thank you.
Okay, that's all for today. And you will find some episode notes and links to our social channels on mastersofprivacy.com. Thank you for listening.